Hi there, I'm Dre, the host and founder of the Dragon Network, an online member-based community where health IT professionals can share ideas, discuss their experience, and collaborate with one another on all things related to health IT. On today's video, I actually want to talk about a leadership framework, which is something I don't think I've brought up very frequently on this channel. However, it is super helpful in health IT, so I thought I'd go ahead and talk about the Cynefin Framework. The framework was developed back in 1999 by a consultant that was working for IBM Global Services by the name of David J. Snowden. So Snowden has worked with other individuals since that time. However, the framework itself is attributed to him in most instances. So the intent is for this to be a framework to assist leaders with decision making. So how this actually is going to help us in health IT, we are placed in numerous situations where we need to react. So whether that be in our help desk troubleshooting or with problem solving from workflow perspective, sort of bringing ideas to the table, or something that happens to our environment. So if there is something new that is introduced or elements that are different than we are expecting, we are consistently reacting in the health IT space. And this framework is actually to help with understanding how to react to some of those and how to frame some of those problems. So before I get started, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to my channel yet, please go ahead and do that. And as always, throughout the video, if you like the content that you're seeing, please go ahead and hit that like button so I can better understand which types of content you guys are interested in seeing. So let's get started. It's based on 5 different domains that will help contextualize issues or decision-making situations that you may find yourselves in. So we'll start with the most simplistic and we'll work our way up to the most difficult, and then we'll do a quick recap of what those look like and how you'd migrate your way through them if you unfortunately found yourself in the worst one. So the first simple domain is known as the domain of best practice. This has also been referred to by Snowden as the obvious domain, or more recently as the clear domain. So you may see any of those 3 titles when referring to this first one. Situations that fall into this domain are stable in nature. There is a clear line between cause and effect, and very little challenge as to what that looks like. It is the realm of known knowns. So everyone involved with the situation understands what the decisions are and why those decisions are being made, and there's very little resistance to those decisions or very little disagreement. So leaders working through one of these simple context situations are going to assess the information that is present, they're going to categorize it as simple, and then they're going to follow rules or best practice that are in place within the organization or the industry to actually make the decisions to resolve the situation that they're facing. So one of the things that can happen in this domain that you need to watch out for is something called entrained thinking. And that is when a problem or a situation is oversimplified and categorized as simple when it really shouldn't be. So this tends to happen most often if leaders are looking for information to be provided to them in summarized or high level or very brief form, and some of the facts aren't actually relayed. They may automatically jump to past experience, they may jump to things that they'd seen before and just oversimplify the situation, and you can find yourself running into a little bit of trouble if that is the case. Just be mindful of how you're analyzing facts if something is categorized as simple to make sure that you're not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions. So the next category is the complicated context. And this is also known as the domain of experts. So situations that fall into this complicated category have a fairly heavy reliance on experts in a particular area. So subject matter experts, vendors tend to be involved in these complicated situations. So someone who has a very targeted skill set, who understands specifically what's happening, and someone who can dive a little bit deeper in to understand what's going on. It is also known as the realm of known unknowns. So there's certainly things that are unaccounted for, but you are aware of what those are. So in this particular domain, there are often multiple right answers. So there are different paths and different decisions that you could take to resolve the situations. There may be multiple that are right. So what happens in these situations is there needs to be a lot more focus on analyzing the different options and figuring out how they would be incorporated into your environment and choosing the one that is not necessarily the right answer that stands out, but what is the best answer for the information and the situation at the time. So again, there can be a few different pathways out of this one. You want to focus on the best one, and you're going to rely on experts in the particular area, so subject matter experts, vendor assistants, things like that, to help you come out of this. So there is a risk of entrained thinking in this domain as well. However, the entrained thinking is most often not the leader that is falling into that situation. It is often the experts that are falling into that. So they may jump to conclusion and think that it is something that they had seen before without fully analyzing what is actually going on. So you run the risk. You also run the risk, since there are usually multiple subject matter experts involved, you run the risk of them closing out external ideas and thought processes. So just focusing on the ones that they know themselves and not being open to any outside options. You really want to, in a complicated environment, make sure that you have all the options available to you and you are making the one that is a best path forward for that particular situation. So you want to make sure that you're considering everything that's in front of you. So one of the biggest struggles that you're going to find here is it can take a really long time to make a decision. So as I mentioned, there are often situations where there's multiple right answers. So you can just imagine that getting everyone to agree on which one to actually execute and what decision you're going to follow through on can be a struggle, especially if there's multiple paths. So communication in here is key, and helping the team to understand sort of what the options are, why the option that you're going to choose is going to be chosen, and then leading them through that decision and really sticking your guns to that one and sort of walking through everything as a group. One step up from the complicated context is the complex context, and this is known as the domain of emergence. So in the complicated context, we have an answer. So there is at least one, and sometimes more than one. So the cause and effects in that one can be aligned, and you do sort of understand how to flow your way through. You just may have to figure out what the best option is. In this particular domain, in the complex domain, you don't have a clear answer in front of you. So there isn't a clear option available to you. It is the realm of unknown unknowns. Understanding the cause and effect in this domain can only happen in retrospect. So the key to making decisions in this complex type domain is for leaders to continually ask questions to make sure that the communication and the analysis and the investigation is ongoing, and to try to look for patterns that are emerging, hence the reason it's called the domain of emergence. So you're going to try to look for patterns that are presenting themselves in the situation, and then you'll react to those patterns by trying to make decisions to remedy the situation. So in this, there may be some trial and error. It also may take quite a bit of time to recognize those patterns and a collaborative effort to do so. Some of the patterns can be difficult to spot at the beginning. They're probably not going to just jump out at you in a complex situation. So one of the things that can make it difficult to make decisions in this particular context is if the leader tries to impose a heavy level of order. So they try to put too much structure around it, and they try to focus that investigation in more of a methodical or a very defined or a very rigid way. It is difficult to spot patterns when there's unknown unknowns if you try to put too much order and structure around it. So it is best in this complex type situation to allow for a bit of fluidity so that you have that step back and you can see sort of what it is that's going on. So moving our way up to something that is even more difficult to make decisions in is a chaotic context. This is considered the domain of rapid response. So in this particular domain, you are putting out fires. So you are literally trying to stop the bleeding, trying to stop that leak, everything that you can do just to get yourself to some form of stability. So it is very reactive, very quick. Decisions need to be made based on the information that you have at the time. You may go back and look at things in retrospect, but there is a very quick, successive movement to get out of these situations. And your goal is actually not to resolve straight from this chaotic context, but it is to get yourself from chaotic into complex or into complicated. So you're trying to get out of the chaotic situation as opposed to completely resolving everything by just moving down to one of the other domains. So communication in this situation, because things are sort of moving all over the place and there's so many different variables that are at play, communication tends to be best when it is top-down communication and broad spread. So it is an area where individuals within the organization or within the teams that are experiencing this type of situation are often more open to leadership directed approaches. So it is something where individuals are also feeling chaotic and they're looking for guidance. So as a leader, it's important to keep that in mind. So you do need to make those quick, rapid decisions based on the information that you have, but you also need to make sure that you're communicating what's going on so that you don't create more panic and chaos at the levels below you. So it is essentially the realm of unknowables. Once you start to find pockets of stability and you start to make little decisions to stop those bleedings, you should be able to pick out subtle patterns that are occurring. And again, your goal is to sort of work your way over to that complex situation where you can start to recognize more patterns and react to those patterns. But it might take a little bit of time to get there. So while this may not seem like a great situation to be in, one of the things that it's actually quite well known for is its ability to generate innovative ideas. So as you can imagine, if you are part of the team or you are the leader that is responding to the chaotic situation that is occurring and you are trying to make those rapid decisions to stabilize the situation, it can be difficult for you to take a step back and to be innovative. However, if you're a leader and you recognize that you're in a situation that is fairly chaotic, one of the things that can be very helpful is if you appoint someone to follow through with the actual activities that are happening in the situation and to make note in real time of everywhere that opportunities could arise for things to be done better. So those can be process opportunities with the actual decision making and reaction or communication. They can be ideas on once you start to find points of stability or patterns or what could have been done to change that. They can be really anything, but if that's occurring in a real-time fashion, you tend to catch a lot more of those innovative ideas than you would if you're only doing this in retrospect. Of course, doing it in retrospect and looking back to see, okay, in that situation, what could have been done differently, what led us to that situation, how could we have reacted, and what changes could have been made so that we don't find ourselves in the situation in the future is absolutely going to be beneficial. But if you have the ability to appoint someone to sort of follow through and document with that mindset from the beginning, it can be super helpful and you can come up with all sorts of things that you can then sort of digest and look through and try to move forward on after, of course, you've resolved the situation. So last but certainly not least in this Cynefin framework is something called the center of disorder. It is represented essentially with a black blob. This is where you have so much confusion or so much happening or a situation where you're just unable to categorize the actual what's going on into one of the other domains. So it can be because it is so chaotic and complex that there is just sort of no vision or no way out of it. It can be that there's too many things happening at once and you're trying to look at everything all together. It can be a couple of different scenarios. But if you find yourself in this one where it is really just oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. How are we supposed to respond to this? The best thing to do is to actually try to compartmentalize and break it down into pieces. So once you break it down into pieces, you should be able to assign it to one of the other 4 domains. You may have a situation where you assign multiple things to multiple areas, and that's going to be fairly typical in health IT. It's very, very rare that we would have a straightforward problem that just ends up in one particular domain. There's usually pieces and parts that can be reacted to differently, but it is important to understand sort of how to break those down and where to assign them out. And then you can work through the decision making and the resolution process within each of the domains based on the information that we just went over. So now that we've gone up in the complexity, similar to the way that we had with a goal of going back down, with the center of disorder, your goal is, of course, to break it down into compartmentalized sections and assign them to a domain. And with each of the domains, in order to get to resolution and to make those decisions and to have those decisions be embraced and understood and recognized by everyone that is involved, you want to try to migrate your way through from chaotic to complex to complicated to simple. So the act of categorizing issues or categorizing decision making can be something that takes a bit of effort to actually practice. It is something I know for myself that I tend to be not very good at unless I'm in a super high pressure situation. And if I'm in one of those situations where I have chaos, then I get much better, or center of disorder, then I get much better at compartmentalizing and sort of figuring out how to work through things or how to chip away at things. But in general, everyday life, it's something that I, of course, am working on just like many of you are. The key thing that you want to keep in mind is really understanding what domain you've got a situation or a problem identified in will help you know whether you need to focus on a policy or process or best practice to resolve the issue, whether you need to work with your team to determine the most appropriate path forward, as in those complicated situations, if you're in complex and need to look for patterns, or if you're in chaotic and need to try to find stability. So the focus of what you're looking for and where your attention should be is going to depend on what type of domain that you're working in, and understanding how to categorize these and what those categories look like can actually be quite helpful. So that's all I have on the Cynefin Framework. I'm going to put a link to an article that was written in 2007 by David Snowden in Harvard Review so that you can have notes on it and read a little bit more about it. I also encourage you to start looking at situations that you're in and just trying to contextualize, even if you're not the decision maker. So even if you understand what it is that's going on and what context that you're in or what domain that you're in, sort of how the decisions need to be made to resolve those situations or to work your way forward. It can be super helpful for when you are in a leadership position or as you progress throughout your career. So I hope that this was helpful and that you have a great rest of your day. I will see you again soon.